Hello, YouTube friends. Welcome, everyone. Before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Chapter 1. The train that was not supposed to pass. The humidity on the platform at Canal Street Station was so thick that it seemed to rise from the ground like an invisible vapor. It was 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The last official train had been gone for more than half an hour. There were no visible passengers left, except for a man asleep on a bench, covered with a dirty coat and a supermarket blanket. Dylan Harper, 26, sat on the edge of the steps leading down to the platform on the J line. He held his wide-lens Canon camera tightly. The furry microphone curled on top. The recording icon flashed red. His YouTube channel, Midnight NYC, was modest, with just 18,000 subscribers. But he had gained a loyal following, thanks to his nighttime explorations of the city. Abandoned hospitals on Staten Island, disused factories in the Bronx, even sewer tunnels under Central Park. But this was different. "Are you sure it was here?" she asked quietly, turning to her friend Tara, who was looking at an old map of the subway system, printed on yellowed paper. "Line Z93. It never officially existed," she muttered. "But there are internal MTA records of a closed tunnel. It starts between Canal Street and Delancey. Some workers call it the Dead Corridor. And supposedly a driverless train runs through there," added Marcus, the third in the group, sarcastically. "Don't make fun," Tara replied without looking up. "There are radio recordings of drivers listening to a frequency that is not in use. A woman speaking in another language. And in 2004, a maintenance guard disappeared after saying he would follow a vibration along the tracks. He was never found. And why the hell are we still here then?" Marcus whispered, glancing nervously at the rails. "This isn't like shooting rats in an abandoned hospital, because the last time an unregistered train came through here was 3 days ago. At 2:22 a.m., Dylan said, adjusting the camera. "Write down this track." Minutes passed. The tunnel fan blew sporadic blasts of stale air. Occasionally, a distant hum could be heard, which could be either an electric current or a train on another deeper line. At 2:19, there was an almost imperceptible change in the atmosphere. The fluorescent lights flickered 3 times, then stabilized. Tara slowly lowered the map. Dylan fixed the camera toward the tunnel. A murmur, like the shuffling of footsteps on gravel, was heard in the distance. Then a soft but growing hum. Something was coming. "Do you hear him?" Dylan whispered. "There's no train scheduled," said Tara, her voice strained. "That doesn't sound like a train," added Marcus, backing toward the stairs. And then they saw it. A faint round light appeared at the end of the tunnel, but it was not the typical white glow of modern train headlights. This one was yellowish like an oil lamp. The hum became a metallic screech, as if rusty wheels were dragging along the rails with no real force. "Holy cow," Tara whispered. The train emerged from the darkness with eerie slowness. 4 cars of a model none of them recognized. Narrower, older, painted dark green with faded black stripes. The windows, small and fogged, seemed covered with a layer of interior dust. It had no number, no visible driver. "It's recording. I've got it," Dylan shouted, without raising his voice. The train stopped right in front of them. The doors did not open. The 3 friends looked at each other without knowing what to do. And that's when the impossible happened. A loud sound, like a dry gasp, emerged from inside one of the wagons. Not a mechanical noise. It was a human sound, and then another, as if something or someone was trying to breathe. Trapped. The doors opened slowly with a creaking groan. A nauseating aroma hit the group. Old iron, putrid dampness, and something else. Something sweet, like rotten fruit. The carriage was completely empty. The lights inside were dim and flickering. The walls were covered with a thin layer of soot or mold. On one of the inside windows, there appeared to be a hand mark. Small, human. "Let's not go in," Marcus said immediately. "That's enough." "Just a minute, just a glimpse," said Dylan, driven by his need to record everything. He walked in with the camera on. Tara followed him, hesitant. Marcus stood in the doorway, his hand on the railing. Inside the car, the air was thicker. Tara noticed that her cell phone no longer had a signal. Dylan focused the camera on the seats, all empty, all covered in a grayish dust. "See that?" he said, pointing to the floor. There was a trail of marks, as if someone had dragged bare feet, leaving partial footprints in the dust. Suddenly, a metallic sound reverberated in the wagon speakers, like an interference. Then a distorted voice spoke in a language none of us recognized. It was feminine, soft, but clipped, as if coming from a rusty radio in another dimension. And without warning, the doors closed. "Marcus!" Tara shouted. The train began to move slowly, as if pulled by an invisible force. "No, enough!" They pounded on the doors from the inside, but they wouldn't open. Marcus was running down the platform, screaming. The train was losing its way again into the tunnel, swallowing them up in the darkness. The yellow light flickered one last time before disappearing completely. Silence. The platform was empty. Only Marcus was breathing heavily by the tracks. Then his cell phone vibrated. He had a notification. Finished live broadcast. Midnight NYC, 2:14 a.m. Duration, 3 minutes, 46 seconds. He played the video. On the screen, the image was blurry. Vaguely, Dylan could be seen entering the carriage, the light trembling, the marks on the floor. But then, something strange. A face, not human. Reflected briefly in a window behind Tara. It wasn't there at the time, or at least they didn't see it. And at the end of the video, just before it cut off, a very clear, very real female voice mumbled something into the microphone. They can't get out anymore. Chapter 2. The Invisible Passengers. The rattle of wheels on rails echoed like a ritual drum in Dylan and Tara's ears. There was no cell phone signal, no radio access. The carriage rocked back and forth with a hypnotic rhythm, as if the train had no destination and no end. "This is not normal," said Tara, squeezing the arms of the seat tightly. Dylan was trying to force the emergency door, but it was sealed. He was recording while mumbling to his channel. "I am trapped on an unregistered train. The car is moving, but there is no driver. There are no passengers. The windows are blocked. I don't know where we're going. If anyone finds this..." The lights flickered. An electric crackle shook the carriage, and an icy blast covered them. At that moment, the seats at the end of the carriage began to change. They were no longer empty. Noiselessly, 3 figures appeared sitting there. Their clothes were anachronistic. A woman in a 1940s coat, a man in a subway operator's uniform, but the logo was different, antique, and a girl about 7 years old, with a rag doll dangling from her arm. All 3 were looking straight ahead, or still, motionless, as if they were not breathing. "Dylan?" Tara whispered. "Were they there a second ago?" He pointed the camera. Nothing. The viewfinder showed the empty seats, but when he looked directly, they were there. Dylan took a step toward them, trembling. Tara held his jacket. "Don't do it." The lights flickered again, this time louder. An electric buzz filled the carriage. In the blink of an eye, the passengers disappeared. A new sound was heard, not in the wagon, but underneath. Something was crawling along the metal floor, right where the rails ran, like long fingernails scraping against rusty iron. Tara leaned over and looked through the lower ventilation slit. There was something there. A figure, small, maybe human, maybe not. It moved on all fours. The darkness enveloped it, but its shape was evident. Limbs too thin, back hunched, head brushing against the train's undercarriage. "What is that?" he whispered. "I don't know," said Dylan. His voice trembled, and then the wagon stopped. Not with a normal brake squeal, but with a brutal jolt that threw them into the seats. The lights went out. Everything went dark. A very faint green glow began to filter through the side door, the one that should never have been opened while in motion. Dylan approached with the camera. Tara behind. The door opened on its own. A stone tunnel, covered with roots, mold, and corroded signs, awaited them. A metal plaque hung awkwardly from the entrance. Z93, transfer point, do not cross. What the hell? Tara read the plaque, dumbfounded. This isn't on any map. "I'm going to record," Dylan whispered. They moved forward. The camera captured the slightest glow from their headlamps. The structure of the tunnel was different from the modern subway. Romanesque arches, columns with strange symbols carved in stone, and something more disturbing. Handwritten names on the walls, hundreds of them. Some were barely legible. Others looked as if they'd been written only a few days ago. One of them stopped Dylan in his tracks. Erickson, L. Maintenance, 2004. "This is the guy who disappeared," said Tara, touching the wall. A click echoed at the bottom of the tunnel. It wasn't an echo. It was something crawling. Again, they ran. Tara's footsteps pounded the standing water on the ground. Dylan panted behind, trying to keep the camera on. In mid-run, they passed a fork. To the left, a dark tunnel with a flashing red light at the bottom. To the right, a narrow passage through which a voice could be heard. "Help." It was a plea, almost imperceptible. "I am trapped." "Did you hear that?" asked Dylan. "No, we are not going to that voice," said Tara. "It's a trap. Let's go." But Dylan had already turned to the right. The voice was getting clearer. It was a man. He was sure of it. He walked deeper until he found a circular room made of bare concrete. In the center, a vertical hole with a rusty ladder descended with no visible bottom. From below, the voice continued, "Please, help me. There are others here. They're asleep. I can't wake up." Dylan leaned over. He recorded the hole. Then he saw something that froze him. At the bottom, far below, a dozen white faces looked up, some with their eyes open, others with no eyelids. One of them pointed at him with a long, swollen, black finger. He ran back to the tunnel. Tara was waiting for him, trembling. "We have to go out." At that moment, they heard the rattle of a train, but not on the main tunnel tracks. The sound was coming from above, from the ceiling, as if a train was traveling above them, in solid air. Each thump rumbled like a monstrous heartbeat. The tunnel began to shake. Dust and stones fell. A metallic clang echoed behind them. As they looked, they saw the carriage they had arrived in silently catching fire. The flames had no sound. Everything burned without heat, like a perverse illusion. "We have no way back," Tara shouted, and then, among the flames, the girl appeared. The same one they saw before, inside the wagon. Only now, her face was covered with soot. Her eyes were black as the thickest night. She held her rag doll and raised her hand. "Do you want to play with me?" she asked, in a voice that was not that of a child. The fire surrounded her. Then everything disappeared. Darkness. Silence. When Dylan awoke, he was lying on the tracks at Delancey Street Station. His camera was still recording. There was no sign of Tara, no sign of the train, no sign of the tunnel. The station was empty, as if they had never been there, except for one thing, knife engraving on the concrete of the edge of the platform. They can no longer leave. Chapter 3. The Last Platform. Dylan no longer knew what day it was. He was sitting on the cold floor of his Brooklyn apartment, surrounded by wires, batteries, videotapes, and sheets of scribbled notes. He had played the recordings over and over, searching for clues. Tara was still missing. The police thought she had run away. He knew she hadn't. He knew she hadn't. He knew she was still down there. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the girl, the train, the invisible passengers. But there was something new. A figure that repeated itself in the camera's frames, barely visible between frames. A shadow at the end of the tunnel, always present, like a sentinel of the underground. It never advanced. It never retreated. It only observed. "There has to be a way in," Dylan muttered to himself. "There's got to be another way down." It was then that he noticed something in one of the videos. In the final frame, just before the camera turned off, there was a number engraved on one of the stone columns, MK13. Searched subway forums, Urban Explorer blogs, MTA archives. Nothing. Just a dead thread in an abandoned forum since 2009. MK13 is the forgotten access, where what was built by men ends, and what should never have been opened begins. An anonymous user had left a vague address, below Canal Street, where the broken column doesn't touch the ground. Dylan went that same night. 2317 Canal Street Station. It was late. Trains were running spaced out. Dylan carried a flashlight, a night vision camera, and a rusty crowbar he'd bought at a seedy hardware store. He waited until the station was empty and went down to the tracks. He advanced through the tunnel, counting steps. At 97 meters, he found what he was looking for. A fractured column with the base suspended inches above the ground, supported by nothing. Next to it, an iron trap door with the symbol M13 engraved in fire. He forced the lock with the crowbar. It opened. A smell of stagnant dampness and old blood enveloped him. He descended a spiral staircase without handrails, carved directly into the rock. The walls bore claw marks, or human fingernails, some recent. When he reached the bottom, he felt the air pressure was different, heavy, dense, as if the place was breathing. There was no light, no sound, only a corridor of black stone and ancient symbols on the walls. The ceiling was so low that he had to stoop. Every step took him further away from the real world. And then he heard something. A familiar voice. Dylan. It was Tara. He ran toward the echo. He turned corridors, crossed subway chambers full of skeletons, passages where water dripped from invisible ceilings, until he reached a platform, a huge platform, circular, illuminated by gas lamps that hung in the air with no visible wires. And there, in the center, like a fallen god, the train, the wagon. the same as before. Only now it was open on all sides, as if someone had stuffed it. Bottomless doors, seats without a base. The floor disappeared in the center in a spiral of pure darkness. And in front of the train, Tara. He was wearing the same coat as when he disappeared, but his face was pale. He had deep circles under his eyes, and he spoke as if repeating someone else's words. "You shouldn't have come." Dylan moved forward with tears in his eyes. He reached out his hand. "Tara, I came for you. You are alive." She slowly shook her head. "Alive? Not anymore. Not like before." Then the ground shook. The train started up on its own. The overhead lights flickered. Shadows began to creep from the tunnels onto the platform. Thousands of black silhouettes, faceless, without a definite shape. Some walked, others crawled. All were advancing toward them. Tara fell to her knees. She whispered an incomprehensible prayer. Dylan hugged her, but she wouldn't look at him. "What is this? What's going on?" "Every city has its layers," Tara said in a broken voice. "New York was built on the bones of another city, and that one on top of another. There's a layer that no one touched, until they opened this line." The tram screeched. Out of its interior stepped a tall figure, dressed in the uniform of the MTA, but with his face covered by a white cloth mask, without eyes or mouth. He carried a rusty signaling cane in his hand. He walked towards them. Tara shouted, "Run! Don't let him take you!" Dylan didn't move. He recorded everything. The man with the cane pointed his signal at him, and he spoke without opening his mouth. "You carry the door with you. You opened it. You have entered. Now you are part of it." Dylan felt the ground swallow him up. He fell. He fell as if there was no gravity. He passed through distorting tunnels. He saw faces floating. He saw entire buildings collapse in reverse. He saw clocks melt. He saw the train race across the sky. And he woke up. 2 weeks later, a maintenance crew found Dylan walking along the tracks between Bowling Green and South Ferry. His feet were mangled, and he had no identification, no memory. He was just mumbling a sentence. "The line keeps running. The line doesn't stop." He was committed to a psychiatric hospital in the Bronx. His camera was confiscated by the MTA. A clip was leaked before it was censored. A train running without rails through a black stone tunnel with green lights and a little girl on her back at the end of the car. Tara was never found. Epilogue. Sometimes at the Canal Street station, at 3:33 a.m., an icy breeze creeps along the rails. Some subway workers say they've heard the echo of a train that doesn't appear on the schedule. Others claim they've seen a black-haired girl climb alone into an empty car. It never stops. And on the MTA control panel, every now and then, an alert appears for a fraction of a second. Line Z93 active. Direction unknown. Passengers multiple. But there's no way to trace it, because the Z93 line does not exist. Or is it? Chapter 1. The platform, not on the plans. In the city that never sleeps, New York's subway lights flicker like anxious fireflies trapped in a subway cage. Each line has its history, each station a legend, but none so avoided as the one that never appears on the maps. It has no name, it has no signage, and yet some claim to have seen it just as the clock strikes 3:33 a.m. Lucas Hernandez, an architecture student at Columbia University, first heard about the phantom platform on a cold November night. He was working on his thesis on the evolution of New York's urban transportation system when he came across a cryptic mention in a 1957 letter included in the MTA archives. The letter, written by an Inspector Maynard, spoke of a closed platform on the F line that was not to be reactivated under any circumstances. It offered no explanations, only warnings. Even if required by the authorities, do not enter. That station no longer belongs to the plane of the living. At first, Lucas took it as just another ghost story. After all, the New York subway is full of dark tales. Operators who disappear, trains that leave but never arrive, passengers who see their reflection move before them. But there was something about the way the letter was worded, as if whoever wrote it did so in real fear, as if he believed every word. Intrigued, Lucas decided to investigate. With the help of old maps, he identified a sealed-off section between the 2nd Avenue and Delancey Street stations. It was a side detour that did not appear on current routes, but clearly existed in the original documents from the 1930s. A way station, perhaps, that was closed after a fire or an accident. None of that, however, figured in the public reports. And then Clara appeared. She was an assistant librarian at the New York Public Library. Petite and quiet, with thick glasses and ink-stained fingers. Lucas met her while leafing through microfiche of old newspapers. She, seeing what he was looking for, whispered to him, "Are you investigating Platform 101? Lucas looked up, surprised. "Is that your name?" "No one says it out loud, but yes, that was his number. It only runs at certain times, and only certain people see it." Despite her low tone, her words struck a deep chord. "Have you been there?" "No," she said sharply, "but I knew someone who did. He was never the same." Lucas didn't get more from her that day, but he already had something, a name. Platform 101. He started looking for cross-references, urban legends, home videos, and he found it. A barely 20-second video on a defunct forum, a shaky camera, an empty train pulling into an unnamed station, a faint red light flickering over the doors, and a voice, "This is not your train. Don't get off." The video was cut off there. He determined that he had to find it, not only for his thesis, but for that tingling obsession that starts in the stomach and spreads through the veins like a shiver. He prepared a backpack with his camera, a powerful flashlight, his cell phone with an external battery, and a notebook where he wrote everything down. He chose the night of Friday, December 13th, to give it a try. At 2:45 a.m., I was already at the Delancey Street station, waiting for the F train to Queens. There was almost no one there. The security guard dozed in his chair. A man in a long coat was talking to himself at the end of the platform. The lights flickered with that electric buzzing sound so typical of poorly kept places. Lucas sat down on a bench, turned on his voice recorder, and whispered, "Record 1, 2:48 a.m. I'm at Delancey, waiting for the F train. Looking for the supposed turnoff to Platform 101. Everything looks normal. We'll see if anything happens at 3:33. Time became liquid. The minutes fell heavy, like lead drops. At 3:29, a train approached. It was not the F. It had no signaling. The illuminated sign above the cab showed distorted characters, as if written on broken mirrors, and yet it stopped. The doors opened with a wet rustle. No one went down. No one went up. Lucas stood up, hesitantly. His heart hammered against his ribs. He looked around. The guard had disappeared. The man in the coat was gone. He was alone, all alone. And then he heard it. Lucas, a voice, his name, from inside the carriage. "Lucas, come." More than sound, it was a sensation, an idea implanted in his mind. He approached. He took a step, then another. The flashlight trembled in his hand. He looked inside the train. It looked normal. Rows of empty seats, dim lights, graffiti on the walls. But there was something in the air, something thick, like humidity after a storm. And then he saw it. In the reflection of the window, where he was supposed to see his face, another face appeared. A pale face, without eyes, with its mouth open in a perpetual scream. He stepped back suddenly. The doors began to close. "Wait," he shouted, without knowing why. But it was late. The train left, and in the instant just before it disappeared into the tunnel, Lucas saw at the end of the carriage a figure with his back turned, tall, motionless, as if it was watching him, without moving. He sat back down, breathing heavily. It was 3:35 a.m. He took out his notebook. He wrote a single sentence. "The train exists, and it's waiting for me." And he didn't know it at the time, but from then on, something began to follow him. Something that smelled of rusty iron and electricity. Something that scratched the silence in the nights with invisible nails. Something that wanted him to come up next time. And there would be a next time. Chapter 2. The Reverse. Dream Passenger. The nights following the encounter with the nameless train were not normal for Lucas. He slept little, and when he managed to close his eyes, he woke up startled by dreams that seemed to last for hours, but left no clear traces in his memory. He awoke with only one certainty. In each of those dreams, he was on the move, on a train, and there was something, or someone, who always came walking from the last car. On the night of December 17th, 4 days after the event, Lucas no longer tried to sleep. Instead, he revisited the 20-second video he found on that dead forum. He watched it in slow motion. Then, frame by frame, something caught his eye. A flash, a strange reflection at the back of the car, just before the train faded into darkness. It looked like a symbol, a circle with 3 crossed lines, like an eye crossed out by claws. He repeated the frame over and over again. The next morning, he received an anonymous message on his university email. "You are being watched. They smell curiosity like others smell fear. Don't go back to the station." The sender was an account with no name, just random letters and numbers. Lucas wanted to ignore it, to think it was a joke, but inside, he knew it was something else. During the day, he began to notice strange things. People staring at him in the subway car, a man in a hat who got on where he got on and got off where he got off. And in the reflection of the train window, sometimes the car seemed longer than it actually was, and he was not alone. That same day, he decided to go back to see Clara, the librarian. She greeted him with a worried face. "Lucas, you said you were looking for him, not that you were going to wait for him. I didn't expect it." He stopped by himself on Delancey Street at 3:33. Clara pursed her lips and led him to a reserved reading room. She closed the door. She took a very old book out of her purse, bound in cracked leather. It had no title. "This is not from any collection," he said. "It was given to me by a former supervisor before he died. It was written by an E.W. Crawford, wrote it. He was an engineer on the subway system during the 1925 expansion. According to him, there was a fork in the tunnel, that was not built by the contract workers. It just happened to be there. Lucas flipped through the book with trembling hands. It wasn't just any logbook. It was more like a diary of torment. The man spoke of noises under the steel, of trains not respecting schedules, of workers disappearing. And on one page in particular, there was a sketch, the symbol of the crossed-out eye. He says that this marker was on the inside of platform 101, that it was not a station. It was a ceremonial cage. "What for?" asked Lucas. Clara lowered her voice to a whisper. "To feed something that travels with us. Something very old." Lucas leaned back, puzzled. What if he was just paranoid? That may be. But the last entry in his diary is March 3rd, 1927. That night, his body turned up in the tunnels near Delancey. There were signs of abrasion, as if he had been dragged for miles. No one knew how he got there, nor why his eyes were missing. Lucas left the library with the book tucked in his backpack, a lump in his throat, and the certainty that something was brewing beneath his feet. That night he collapsed in his small Morningside Heights apartment, exhausted from days without sleep, and he dreamed again. Only this time, it wasn't a train. It was the station. I was standing in front of an empty platform, the walls covered with posters in an impossible language. In the distance, the sound of the train. But it wasn't coming. It was stopped, waiting. In his dream, Lucas was walking towards it, but something stopped him, a formless shadow that spoke to him not in words, but in mental images. One must stay. One must replace. He woke up panting, covered in sweat. The clock read 3:34 a.m. His cell phone vibrated. A message with no sender. "Go back to the platform. Someone must take your place." That sentence shook him more than any vision. Someone had to take his place. What did that mean? Had he already gone up without knowing it? What if since that first night, he was no longer exactly the same Lucas? The next few hours were a whirlwind. He began to see more symbols in the city, painted on poles, scratched on tunnel walls, even on the old paper tickets they used in museums, all with the same crossed-out eye. He realized that the symbol was not part of the train. It was a warning, a word of caution, but also a key. That night, he returned to Delancey Street. This time he carried no flashlight, only Crawford's book and a white candle, like the one they used in the rituals Clara had shown him on a page of the diary. At 3:30 a.m., the platform was empty. At 3:33, the train arrived, but this time it was no longer empty. A figure waited inside the first carriage, seated, motionless, with a face that Lucas couldn't quite make out. Only one thing. She seemed to be wearing his same clothes, his same backpack. The door opened. Lucas did not move. The figure stood up and walked towards him. Each step echoed on the platform like an echo submerged in water. When it was in front of him, the light flickered, and in that instant, Lucas saw it. It was him, or someone with his face, but the eyes, they were empty, completely black. "Your turn," he said, and Lucas understood what "one must stay" meant. The train was not looking for victims. It was looking for replacements. Chapter 3. The Last Station. Lucas could not move. In front of him, his reflection, if that's what it was, watched him without blinking. It was not like a mirror. It did not imitate his gestures or share his breathing. It only looked at him with those black, bottomless eyes, as if behind them there was a tunnel with no exit, an eternal void. The train continued to wait, motionless, as if time did not pass at that moment. No one else seemed to inhabit the world except Lucas, his double, and the high-pitched rustling of the electric wires on the roof of the carriage. A metallic smell, like rust and old salt, filled his nostrils. "Your turn," the figure repeated, and as he spoke, he did not move his lips. Lucas took a step backward. The figure imitated him, but forward. For an instant he thought of running, up the stairs, out of the station, forgetting the symbol, the train, the dreams, everything. But an invisible force, an atavistic understanding, stopped him. He had crossed a threshold the night he agreed to get on the train, and in that kind of pact, there is no turning back. "Who are you?" he asked in a broken voice. "I am what is left when you can no longer be you." Then the figure stretched out its hand, and Lucas felt a tug in his stomach, as if a part of him, intangible, was being pulled into that human-shaped void. An impulse pushed him to react. He reached into his backpack, pulled out Crawford's book, and held it like a barrier, like a makeshift talisman. The reflection stopped. For the first time, he seemed annoyed, not out of fear, but out of disappointment. "That only delays the inevitable," he said, in a voice that was not of one person, but many. Men, women, old people, children, all speaking from a throat that had no tongue. The train emitted a high-pitched whistle, and the platform lights began to fail. Lucas felt the air become thicker, as if the oxygen was being drained. Pages of the book began to shake loudly, and one of them came loose and fell to the floor. On it was a handwritten phrase. "Last one in, replace. Last one down, remember." Lucas swallowed. Did that mean that someone, once upon a time, had made it out? He took the page, put it in his pocket, and ran, not to the stairs, but toward the train. He jumped inside the first carriage just before the doors closed, with a sharp click. The reflection did not follow him. He stood there on the platform, motionless, watching, and then it just disappeared. The train began to move with no visible driver. The interior was antique, lined with blackened wood and cracked leather seats. The lights flickered, but there was something more disturbing than that. Each window showed a different landscape. Not the tunnel, not the other stations, but impossible images. In a window, an abandoned hospital ward, with rusty beds and dark stains on the walls. In another, a winter forest, where someone, or something, was crawling through the trees without leaving a trace. In one more, Clara's library, empty, with all the pages of all the books torn out and floating in the air like ashes. Lucas clung to the seat, trembling. The train was not following a physical route. It was traveling through memories, through fears, through fragments of consciousness. Then a voice came over the loudspeakers, distorted, as if coming from the radio of a sunken submarine. "Next station, inverted gaze." The lights went out completely. When they were turned on, Lucas was no longer alone. The passengers had shown up, the dozens of them, some standing, some seated, all silent, all with grayish skin, eyes closed, except one. An old man with a weathered face stared at him. "It took you a while to come back," he said. Lucas did not know what to answer. "Who are you?" "I was like you, curious. I saw the train in 1956. I never got off. But I learned." "You learned what?" "That no one stays if someone else takes his place." Lucas understood. The passengers were not dead. They were replacements. Each had been part of an exchange. Each had boarded, and in doing so, had left someone else behind. An endless chain of people occupying the space someone else gave up, or lost. "And how did you get out?" The old man smiled sadly. I never went out. This is my reflection. You can still do it, but you have to offer something. Lucas remembered the page in the book. Last one down, remember. The train stopped. The station was a dark place with no name, no walls, just a stone platform suspended in nothingness, and in the center, a huge mirror. Lucas came down. The mirror reflected him accurately, but it was not like ordinary mirrors. It reflected his thoughts, his mistakes, his fears. It showed his mother dying alone while he didn't answer the phone. It showed the boy he inadvertently pushed in school and never apologized. It showed the decisions that made him human, fallible, real. The voice sounded again, this time without speakers. It was inside his head. Choose. A figure emerged from the mirror. It was not his reflection, but another version of Lucas. Calm, serene, no weight on his shoulders. "I can stay," said the figure. "Why you?" "Because I am the part of you that can live here without breaking. You still want to come back. And if you do it, what happens to me? You remember, but you also bear the mark." Lucas looked down. Her wrist had the symbol, the crossed-out eye, engraved like a burn. He closed his eyes. "Do it," he said. The figure embraced him, and in that instant, Lucas felt as if his body unfolded. His consciousness was sucked into a white light. He fell, or floated. He could not know. "Tonight is the 7th night," he said simply. "You can't avoid it. The seal is broken. Cain has already read the book in your dreams. The pit awaits you." "I'm not going down," Abigail whispered. "It's not about choice. It's about blood. You are Miriam's blood. The earth knows it. The flesh knows it. He knows it." She covered her face with trembling hands. "Then tell me what to do. I don't want to die here." Anak set down the sack. Inside, a white tunic stained with red, a handbell, and a ritual knife. "You'll go down, but not as a victim, as a cleric." Abigail stared. "You want me to perform a ritual?" "Not a true one, a false rite. One to fool Cain, to distract what sleeps long enough for us to seal the pit again. There's one chance. Only you can do it." She looked at the tunic. Heavy linen. The blood wasn't makeup. Someone had worn this before. "If I wear that, what do I say?" "The book will give you the words. Not until you're down there. Not until they can mean something." Abigail felt her chest collapse inwards, but she knew. If she did nothing, she'd die. Worse, she wouldn't truly die at all. The descent began at dusk. The trapdoor to the basement opened easily now. The air below was thick. Walls wept moisture. The lantern barely pushed back the dark. Enoch followed with the flame. Each step groaned. The basement had a second door, iron, rusted. Abigail had always avoided it. Now Enoch pushed it open. A tunnel, narrow, carved in bedrock, cold. After a few yards, the walls changed. Symbols appeared, not crosses, but twisted forms, half human, half something else. At the end, a crypt, a circular room, an altar in the center, 7 stone benches. On them, figures, once human, now husks, dressed in black, leather masks, missing limbs, one without a head. They turned their heads toward her. Abigail nearly collapsed. In the center, a pit, no bricks, just a spiral hole in the earth. From it rose a black mist, and beside it stood Cain, taller, thinner, face now a bone mask, eyes like voids. "Welcome, daughter of the Keeper," he intoned. "It has been long since the last rite, but the flesh remembers, and you have been read. Your soul is signed." Abigail raised the book. Her fingers bled from clutching it. She opened it. The words were there. a language she understood without knowing. Et sanctum est flamma quae devorat, et verbum fitos, etos fauce. The husks began to sway, chanting, whispering. Et in novissima nocte aperietur corpus, et cantabit pulvis. The pit quaked. Something stirred, scaled, starved. Cain raised his arms. Chains fell from his sleeves. Bring the soul. The daughter has spoken the chant. One figure rose. Approached Abigail, her grandmother, or what was left. Abby, don't let him win. Abigail sobbed, but kept going. Et cum plenum sit Carmen, cloritur abyssus in sanguine voluntario. She stabbed her palm. Blood sprayed the altar. The pit screamed. Wind exploded upward. Cain howled. Enoch's lantern flared white. Now, he shouted, say the final word. Abigail screamed. Clovis. The pit shrank. A spiral of black meat tried to rise, but her blood burned like salt. Cain fell. Dust. Only dust. The husks crumbled. Silence. The pit sealed. Abigail awoke days later in a rural hospital. Hikers had found her collapsed by a roadside, dehydrated and bleeding. The police searched Wicker Hollow. They found nothing. No town, no houses, just trees and a dry well sealed with stone. Abigail never illustrated again, moved far away, but sometimes in her dreams she hears the bells. 1, 2, 3, and every time she wakes up with blood under her nails and the black book on her nightstand. Chapter 1. The Arrival. Caleb had never heard of Ashford Hollow before. It was one of those small towns in rural America, hidden between hills and forests, almost forgotten by time and the world. But when he received the letter from the anonymous sender, inviting him to document the strange phenomena occurring there, he couldn't resist. As he entered the town, a cold wind swept through the streets, although it was midsummer. The houses were old, with peeling paint and cracked windows, and the silence was overwhelming. There were no children playing, no cars driving by, just a heavy, oppressive quiet. The locals eyed him with suspicion, avoiding eye contact. In the only diner open at that hour, Caleb sat down and tried to ask questions, but the answers were vague, full of warnings. Better not stay after dark, an old man whispered. No one sleeps here, not since the bells started ringing. At night, Caleb set up his camera and audio recorder in the room he'd rented. At the stroke of midnight, a strange noise echoed through the town. The sound of an old church bell ringing 4 times, slow and heavy, though the town's church had no bell. And then he woke up. He was in his apartment, in bed. The clock read 7:21 a.m. Everything seemed normal, but it wasn't. On his desk, Crawford's book, with all its pages blank. In the bathroom mirror, his reflection didn't mimic him for a second, just one. But it was enough. On his wrist, the mark was still there. Lucas returned to the university. He taught his class. He walked around town. No one seemed to notice anything strange about him. But every night, at 3:33, he woke up, and he would hear from underground the train whistle. Not a sound, a memory, a call. I knew that eventually the train would be looking for a new replacement, and this time he would know who to offer. Chapter 1. The last train to Court Street. It was 2:37 a.m. when the metallic sound of the gates closing echoed through the tunnels like a funeral whisper. Anthony Morrow, a middle-aged janitor hired by the MTA, stood alone in the abandoned Court Street station in Brooklyn. Officially, that terminal had been closed since 1946, but unofficially, It was said that the janitorial staff, from time to time, was under strict orders to make inspections of the place. Unsigned orders, no return address, just a yellowed envelope in the personnel locker. Anthony was not superstitious. At least he thought he was. He had spent 17 years on the MTA. He'd seen it all. Rats the size of cats, homeless people living between tracks, bodies that didn't make it across the platform. But that night, from the moment he walked down the wet stairs to the Court Street platform, something felt different. The air smelled old, but also something else, like rusted metal and burnt clothes. He carried his flashlight, as he knew better than to rely on emergency lights. In fact, when he arrived, he noticed that the power was completely out, as if the entire station had been devoured by a blackout from another century. As I walked along the empty platform, the flashlight flickered. Once, twice. Anthony rapped the body of the device with his knuckles. "Come on, don't start now." The light returned for a few seconds. Then it went out. Silence. A thick, almost liquid silence enveloped him. Only the echo of his breathing filled the space. He took another step, and then he heard it. A squeak, like the sound of metal wheels rolling very slowly, as if a train. Moving forward in the shadows, Anthony turned his head toward the siding. Nothing, just darkness. But the screeching came again, this time accompanied by a thump, a deep, low clank that made the platform vibrate, as if something gigantic had just slowed down. "Hello?" Anthony called in the firmest voice he could muster. "Is anyone there?" Silence. And then a puff of hot air emerged from the tunnel. It wasn't breeze from the ventilation system. It was breath. Heavy. Unnatural. Anthony stepped back, his heart pounding, but his pride kept him in place. "It must be a maintenance train," he whispered, more to himself than to reassure himself. And just then, he saw it. A train, old as a specter from another century, emerged from the tunnel with chilling slowness. There were no lights. There was no sound of the engine, only the wailing of its wheels and the creaking of its doors as they opened. Wagon 731. It was written in black paint, with crooked letters, as if a child had played at drawing them in anger. A single door opened, and from within, a putrid odor emerged like a wave. Damp flesh, rust, stagnant dampness. Anthony stepped back, but something in his body would not obey. He stood still, frozen, as if the train was watching him, inviting him. The door remained open, a few seconds, then minutes, as if waiting. Then, without meaning to, Anthony took a step toward the wagon. The ground crunched beneath his boots. The squeak of rusted metal grew louder. He crossed the threshold, and the door closed behind him with a thud, as if it had never wanted to let him out. Inside the wagon, the light was red. A hellish orange gloom enveloped it. There were no passengers, just endless rows of old seats, upholstered with torn cloth and stained with something that looked like dried blood. The wagon began to move on its own. No operator, no driver. The outside world became a tunnel, black, eternal. Anthony staggered on impulse, and in that instant he noticed something else. He was not alone. On the seat in the back, a hunched figure seemed to be watching him. A man, or something that once was, dressed in a 1930s MTA uniform, hat included, stood rigid. His face was shrouded in shadow. Only his teeth were visible. Too many teeth. "Did you hear it too?" murmured the figure in a broken voice. Anthony swallowed. He took a step back. The figure rose, but its movements were not human, as if every joint was dislocated, as if its body had no bones, only sinew and wire. "He calls us when he wants us to hear him," said the figure, pointing to the ceiling. "The walls are hungry."